All right, I'm Laura Ingraham. This is Ingram Angle from Washington tonight. Let's get right into it. Now, the words courageous and brave, they're tossed around so casually these days. In pop culture, in politics, in Hollywood, in sports.
God bless Liz Cheney for having the courage to stand up virtually alone.
That athletes like Colin Kaepernick bravely chose to kneel down so that others may have the courage to stand up.
What do you think of Meryl Streep's speech?
I thought it was very brave because I believe that hate and fear is just ruining the soul of America.
That what Christine Blasey Ford did today was brave, and she spoke her truth.
Admiral Rachel Levine is a groundbreaking leader, public health champion, and an advocate.
My definition of courage would be to be true to yourself.
Joe Biden, who knows and has learned and studied America's history and has therefore the courage to say Black Lives Matter.
And other altruistic adjectives are being bastardized as well. Hillary Clinton and her daughter are now out flacking their new show called Gutsy.
What is the most gutsy thing you've done recently, both of you?
Well, I have to say, doing that series and getting way outside my comfort zone, I did everything from try to learn to tango, which, believe me, is not easy, to making acorn soup.
Dancing and soup? Very gutsy. What sacrifice? What courage, Hillary? But that's not all, folks, because don't forget, the gutsiest thing of all is hating Trump.
Our former president really not only mainstream but mainline hate in our country. So it was really important to us to include gutsy women standing up to hate, standing up to white supremacy, standing up to bigotry in their own lives, in their communities, and for our country, because I think we all need to be doing that right now.
No, right now, Chelsea, what we need to be doing is recognizing and celebrating the gutsiest and most courageous woman probably the last 100 years. And that's the woman you failed to even mention in your silly little book, Queen Elizabeth II. Now that was a gutsy woman. Because gutsy is someone who somehow, even at a young age, sets a dignified example for others to follow.
We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers, and airmen. And we are trying, too, to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war. When peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place.
And gutsy is putting duty first, putting your fellow countrymen ahead of even your own personal desires.
I have in sincerity pledged myself to your service, as so many of you are pledged to mine. Throughout all my life, and with all my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your trust.
And gutsy is carrying on with time-honored traditions when so many in modern society are rejecting them and ridiculing them.
Visits by American presidents always remind us of the close and long-standing friendship between the United Kingdom and the United States. And I'm so glad that we have another opportunity to demonstrate the immense importance that both our countries attach to our relationship.
When we understand what the monarchy is, and it really is this deeply colonial role, and not just in the past, but now. I mean, the fact that we take this really white family to represent what Britain is, just tells you that this is a kind of hangover to the colonial time.
Oh, really? Gutsy is standing resolute and stoic in times of great national change and challenge, as she's done since 1953.
I cannot lead you into battle. I do not give you laws or administer justice. But I can do something else. I can give you my heart and my devotion to these old islands and to all the peoples of our brotherhood of nations.
Now, Queen Elizabeth's kind of grit and determination and courage, gutsiness, It's kind of considered passé in much of today's modern world, and it's a world where so many expect a trophy for being their authentic selves. A world where people fret and navel gaze about work-life balance or worry about whether they have enough hours in their schedule for self-care and me time. Queen Elizabeth loved her dogs and her horses and her family, but she also loved her country. She wouldn't think of casting aspersions on her country or criticizing her nation publicly like so many Democrat leaders today do so readily. Elizabeth knew what was expected of her and fulfilled her duties, and she did so brilliantly, decade after decade after decade. We're never going to see another like her. It is truly the end of an era. But we can hope that Britain and the rest of the world, maybe even Hillary Clinton, learn something about real guts, real courage, and real service from her example.
Tony Maroney writes, quote, "She meant her every word about duty and she carried it out until the very end. Rest in peace, Elizabeth, you have earned it." Prince Thorne writes, quote, "I could give you my heart. The only woman leader to have ever said that, to have done that, and she did it being a servant." John Harling writes, quote, "The Queen said of her beloved husband's strength and stay throughout these years, and we would never know the service he had given to Britain and the Commonwealth. Ma'am, I think that goes tenfold for you. We will simply never know the influence she had on the world events, nor the self-control and tact it takes to chat and smile and taking to some of the most brutal tyrants of the world. I doubt anyone could withstand 70 years in the public eye having every move, every word, and your clothes scrutinized with the grace and dignity of Queen Elizabeth. Most of us wouldn't last a weekend." Now we're left with the science-denying adulterer and chinless wonder Prince Charles. I hope he takes advice from wiser counsel and passes the crown to William. R. Huff writes, quote, "Dignity, honor, courage are words that do not describe any American politician living today. We should only be so fortunate to have breathed a leader such as she was." End quote. Baruch Guitars writes, quote, "She was a good person who happened to become queen. Considering all the times in history the worst people got power, we should celebrate when a good person not only gets power, but proves over their lifetime that they were worthy of it." End of quote. R. Zoo writes, quote, "Truly the end of an era." End quote. One reply, Rodney 1984 writes, quote, "Not looking forward to the next one." End quote. DDP writes, quote, "Even though the Queen was like a lion with no teeth, this one took the position for honor and love and duty of country, self-sacrifice of her own wants and desires, never running off to America and denouncing her position, duties, and responsibilities. No, she bare her own cross and followed Jesus all the way to the end." End of quote. The Reverend W. Pitt writes, quote, "The Queen was the polar opposite to people like Meghan Markle. The idea of being a victim to her would have been unthinkable. She had many problems throughout her life, but she just got on with it and never complained. Meghan has already got a list as long as your arm of all her first world problems, which she wastes no time in letting everyone know about. It is upsetting to think that the dignified, uncomplaining mentality of the Queen seems to be a thing of the past. Rest in peace." End of quote. Philip Dennis writes, quote, "Queen Elizabeth was magnificently loyal to her people and nation. She is truly one of a kind, leading by example. Never forget, she paid for her wedding dress herself by cashing in the food ration stamps she saved that did not use during World War II." End of quote. Rose Zingelman writes, quote, "Oh, come on, Laura. Hillary was pretty gutsy to grab that Louis XIV chair into the White House moving van, along with other priceless antiques to haul to her new Westchester house back in the day." End of quote. Abel Garcia writes, quote, "They won't learn anything. Their hearts are incubated with hatred." End of quote. One reply. Mick Cowan writes, quote, "True that no grace lives within, only seething black remnants." End of quote. George Harrison writes, quote, "Gutsy, riding down the mall in full uniform, a gunman took a shot at her. She expertly controlled her frightened horse and carried on. It is what you do that matters. Rest in peace, Elizabeth. Now you can rest." End of quote. Matthew Latham writes, quote, "If the Bidens, Clintons, or Obamas attend the funeral, you might want to remove any jewelry from the Queen before they file by." End of quote. God bless the Queen.